Hello, I'm Zaccura, and today I'm going to be sharing my review of Turner Acryl Gouache. Hooray! I've been using this set of paints for about a month, and it has very quickly become one of my favorite mediums to work with. And in this video, I'm going to explain why, as well as answer many of the common questions people have regarding acrylic gouache and this brand in particular. This video is not sponsored, by the way. I purchased these paints myself, and I just want to share my experience and share some of my honest opinions and tips. So hopefully you will find this video helpful. The set I have comes with 24 colors, and each tube has 11 milliliters of paint, which is the smallest size of tubes that Turner makes. I'm pretty sure you can't even buy individual paint tubes of this size. It only can be found in this kind of set. And I wanted to get this set because it has the largest array of colors for the price. This way I could have a lot of colors to try out and play around with, and then down the line I could always get bigger tubes of my favorite colors. Note number one, this set only comes with one tube of white paint, and when you're working in any kind of opaque medium like this, white is something that you're going to be using a lot of for mixing, so that will probably be the first color that I'm going to need to get more of. This specific set was also apparently imported from Japan, so most of the writing on the box is in Japanese. I do not speak Japanese or read Japanese, but it wasn't a problem because you can find a lot of information on these paints and each color on Turner's website. This set that I'm reviewing is part of Turner's original line of acryl gouache colors. They also have a few other lines, such as pastel, Japanesque, metallic, fancy, etc. But I have not tried any of those yet. If you have, please do let us know what your experience has been with those in the comments. Now for the fun part. Swatching. So the instructions of these paints say that in order to get the right consistency, you should use 1 part water to 2 parts paint. And in my experience so far, that is indeed the perfect golden unicorn ratio. However, even when I'm using an eyedropper tool, I often overdo it with the water because I'm working with such a small amount of paint. So instead, now I just use a nice wet paintbrush and just kind of go by feel to get that perfect consistency. And when you do use the right amount of water, these paints have a very, very nice consistency in my opinion. They're super smooth and velvety and pleasant and just very yummy to work with. Paint theory. Any paint that makes you want to eat it is a good paint. Of course, don't actually eat it. It's not good for you. Got a lot of calories. I have heard a number of people mention buying these Turner acryl paints online and having it arrive with a few tubes that are crusty and dried out and unusable. I have not had this issue. All 24 of my tubes arrived in perfect condition. I bought them on Amazon, and the tubes themselves feel very sturdy, very airtight. The caps screw on very tightly, so I don't think there is any packaging issue on Turner's end, but sometimes sellers don't necessarily store paints properly, or they sell off very, very old sets of paint which are much more prone to being dried out. So whenever buying paint tubes like these, which do not have any kind of vacuum seal, always give them a check as soon as you receive them. Open every single tube, that's what I did, and give them a look just to be sure that none of them are faulty. And even if all of your paint tubes are perfectly fine, an extra tip is to store your paint tubes inside of a tightly sealed jar to help preserve their shelf life even longer. Speaking of drying out, when working with these acryl paints, it's important to make sure that you don't let your paint dry out on your palette or your brush as you're working, because this is acrylic gouache. And for those who may not know the difference between acrylic gouache and regular or designer's gouache, is that when regular gouache dries out, it can be reactivated with water, much like watercolor. But due to the acrylic polymer binding that is used to make acrylic gouache, once acrylic gouache dries out, it becomes water resistant and cannot be reactivated with water. Later in this video, I will be talking a bit more about that and why I really like this attribute. But for now, just make sure you don't let your paints dry out. One way you can do that is by keeping a spray bottle of water nearby and just giving your palette a spritz now and then as you're working. Or you can do like I did and get yourself a Stay Wet palette. On the most basic level, all it is a closable box with a wet sponge inside and a piece of parchment-like paper on top that you mix your paints on, and the moisture from the sponge keeps your paints nice and fresh. I've been using it for about a month now and all of my paints are still wet inside. And the longer your paints stay fresh, it means the less paint you waste and the less stressful the painting process is because you don't have to rush things. These paints are fairly opaque, some more than others, which you can see from these swatches. These swatches were done with just one layer of paint, but if you do 2 or 3 layers, then I noticed that all of these colors are fully opaque. They can all cover the black line. I especially love the white, which is very, very opaque. Just one layer almost completely covered the black line. These paints are also highly pigmented and vibrant. A little goes a long way, which I love. You really only need like a tiny little dot in order to do a painting. And I am not super familiar with different pigments, but do note that this paint line doesn't have a lot of single pigment colors. There are a few, 1 or 2 or 3 in each color category, but most of the colors are mixes of different pigments in order to get the color that's in the tube. If this is important to you, each tube actually has the pigment codes listed on it, and the Turner website has exact info on each color as well. Personally, I don't really care much about what pigments I'm using. I actually kind of like pre-mixed colors because it makes things faster sometimes. But I know that some artists are really into the exact science of color mixing and they like to know which pigments they're working with, which pigments they're paying for, so I figured this was at least worth mentioning. And now, Lightfastness. These Turner gouache paints go by a pretty standard Lightfastness rating system using stars, which you can find on the back of each tube, 3 stars being the highest rating of Lightfastness that they offer. Here are the ratings for each color in this 24-piece set. According to Turner's website, 3 stars means that the paint will last 50 plus years in museum conditions, 2 stars means 20 to 30 years, 1 star means 10 to 20 years, and no star means less than 10 years. All the colors in this set are rated either 3 or 2 stars, with a few that have no stars because they are made with fluorescent dyes. Now, 50 plus years in museum conditions are not the highest rating of Lightfastness out there by any means. There are definitely brands of paint that have much higher Lightfastness ratings, but I would say, in my opinion at least, that for everyday commissions and professional work, these are more than good enough to feel comfortable using for client work. Again, that's just my opinion. Every artist has to go by their own ethics and morals and feel, and considering the price point for these paints, they're not the cheapest, but they're also not the most expensive. I think that you're really getting what you pay for in terms of Lightfastness. That being said, I figured I'd put these claims to the test and do my own Lightfastness test by swatching each color and then taping half of the swatches to a sunny south-facing window. Doing this will accelerate any UV damage that would normally take years to show, and I'll be keeping it there for a few months, maybe like 3 or 4, at which point I will make a new video showing the results, so be sure to subscribe if you want to see that. Speaking of, if you are enjoying this review so far, please hit that thumbs up because it really helps this channel and this video. now that all that snoring, boring, but important technical stuffs are out of the way, let's paint something for real. But what to paint? This? This thing? Maybe this guy? Aha!
Hey, what about me?
This is my aloe plant named Jim. You might recognize him from my previous video. He was really neglected for a very long time, but I gave him a trim and repotted him and watered him, and I asked you guys in that video to say some nice things to Jim for me to read to him during his recovery. Oh, Jim, you've got some really nice comments. Just let me read you a few, okay? Eleazar Gaming says, "All my love to Jim, may he root soon." Aww. He totally has. He was completely falling over when I first put him here, and I thought I was gonna have to repot him again because I just didn't put him in the pot right. But then after giving him some support with these bands, I kind of tied him to my desk. It was like a whole cast situation. And just a few days, he completely stood up straight. It's amazing to me. Mia Art says, "Hey Jim, you are a strong, independent plant. I am sure you will outgrow your recent surgery and rise up from it even greener, prettier, and bigger than you ever have been before. You got this." Aww. I think you're absolutely right, Mia. I also like to show him some of his offspring, you know, just to show him like, hey, they're alive and they're thriving, so you don't need to worry. Thank you guys so much for all of your wonderful comments. So clearly, Jim is an absolute champ, so I figured he deserves the painting treatment. This is the reference photo that I went with, and I decided to try to go for a pretty realistic still life style with emphasis on pretty realistic because that's pretty much where my skills are at. Working on it, I'm working on it. One day I will be able to drop the pretty in front of the realistic. And the reason I wanted to paint him in this style is because I noticed that ever since the rise of acrylic gouache in the online art community, it's become pretty popular. The medium has also kind of become associated with a specific style. Most artists I see tend to use acrylic gouache for very clean, very flat, very graphic, almost digital art-esque styles. And I get it, because I also paint in that style. I love working like that, and acrylic gouache with its water-resistant quality once dry is honestly perfect for that kind of style because it's easier to be very clean and tight with it when compared to regular gouache. But I also find this acrylic gouache to be very versatile and should not be limited to just one way of painting. It absolutely can be used for looser, more painterly styles of work. You can go thin to thick and layer things up. And in my experience with the way that I like to paint, I've actually found acrylic gouache easier to work with for more heavily layered work than regular gouache. You don't have to worry as much about the procedure, going thin layers to thick layers, because if you accidentally go a little too heavy with the water during the later stages of the painting, it won't mess up the previous layers that you've built up because everything stays in place and won't get reactivated with water. In fact, you can actually use this attribute to your advantage and do techniques such as glazes and tints, where you take a very watered down gouache or even watercolor or ink and paint it on top of your finished painting to help push your hues towards a certain direction. And glazes and tints are pretty much not a possible technique to do with regular gouache, at least not in my experience, but it's very easy to do with acrylic gouache. The only thing that I find to be a bit of a struggle with these Turner Acrylic Gouache paints is mixing paint right on the paper. There is a short window of time to blend things out, smooth out your edges, and even do some mixing on the paper, but for the most part it dries pretty quickly. So if you're the kind of artist that likes to sort of throw thick layers of paint on the canvas or the paper and just sort of blend it out and figure it out on the page, you will probably find this medium more difficult and more frustrating to use than regular gouache. But if you're an artist that prefers to pre-mix your colors in your palette rather than on the page, which is sort of the way that I prefer to work, then the fast drying time really isn't an issue. I actually kind of like it because I'm very impatient, but it's something important to keep in mind. Another very popular question I see about acrylic gouache is, what is the difference between acrylic gouache and just acrylic paint? Since they both use the same acrylic polymer binding and they both cannot be reactivated with water once dry. The main difference is that acrylic gouache dries matte, whereas acrylics usually dries shiny.
But Zaccura, wait! What about matte acrylics?
There's also such a thing as matte acrylic paint, which dries matte, and that sounds to me as pretty much exactly the same thing. But obviously, even though each acrylic paint has the same base formula, every brand has their own special mix. And I would assume, this is just an assumption, that when a paint is branded as acrylic gouache, it means that it's formulated to feel and behave as close as possible to gouache, meaning you should be able to work in very thin layers as well as thick layers. It should water down very well. Whereas matte acrylics will probably be formulated to feel as close as possible to regular acrylic paint. And so each paint will be targeted towards slightly different audiences with slightly different workflows and experiences. That is just my logical assumption. I'd love to try out a few brands someday and see if this idea checks out. Maybe there truly is no difference between acrylic gouache and matte acrylics, and the companies are just slapping different labels on things in order to market it to a broader audience. It's very possible. If you feel you know more about this and you've tried matte acrylics and acrylic gouache and you know the difference, then definitely feel free to share your knowledge in the comments. But when it comes down to it, how something is labeled and marketed doesn't really matter for artists. What really matters is how much you enjoy using something. I think beyond formula, beyond price, beyond even lightfastness and overall objective quality, the best art material is the one that brings you the most joy when you're using it. The material that gets you in the mood to make art and fulfill your creative visions as often and as much as possible. And these Turner paints feel just about perfect for where I am right now as an artist and a person with a budget. I don't feel like I'm fighting with my materials when I paint with these paints. In fact, it's one of the most intuitive paints I've ever used. Its attributes just sync up perfectly with the way that I like to paint. And I also don't have to worry that if I accidentally let a tube dry out or something, it's not a big deal, because I'm not spending like $20 on a single tube. And overall, these Turner Acryl Gouache paints are one of the first materials I've used that gives me the confidence to do traditional still life. Usually, if I want to do something more realistic, I will go digital because you can take as long as you want, you can adjust everything, you can undo everything, it's great. Realism is very finicky, the slightest details can throw things off and make them look wonky and weird. So doing realism with traditional materials usually just gives me anxiety because I can't take anything back. But these paints are opaque enough to cover up my mistakes and also versatile enough for me to take a leap into trying traditional still life a bit more. And I'm very excited about that, actually. And any art material that gets me inspired to go out of my comfort zone, but still enjoy myself is a good material in my book. As always though, it's all a matter of finding what works for you, and I always want to mention that just because I like something or something works really well for me doesn't mean that you'll have the same experience. But I hope that by sharing my experience and research, it will help you decide what you want to try, and hopefully I can play a role in helping you find the tools that work best for you and your workflow. Overall, I can definitely safely recommend these Turner Acryl Gouache paints to anyone who likes gouache. Even if you already have like your favorite brand, you're probably not gonna dislike these paints. And for people who are maybe looking for their first set of gouache to try out, I think these paints will work very well. But if you've never tried any type of gouache before, then I definitely recommend trying both designer's gouache and acrylic gouache, just so you can get a feel for the different attributes and find the one that you like the best. As always, I will have all the materials I used in this video listed in the description box, and thank you guys so much for watching and listening and spending some of your day with me. I hope you found this video helpful, enjoyable, and if you did, please be sure to hit that thumbs up and subscribe. And if you made it this far, drop a comment below letting me know what you think of this review. If you have any other questions about these paints, definitely feel free to ask them in the comments, and let me know if you've tried these paints. If you'd like to support me and this channel, you can check out my shop on Zaccura.com. Another way to support this channel, by the way, is through hitting that little heart symbol with the money sign inside of it. You can find it underneath or next to every single video on my channel. It's called Super Thanks, and it's a way for you to easily donate to this channel to help support it. And it gives you sort of a cute highlighted comment. I just turned it on like a couple months ago because I totally forgot to turn it on before. So I figured I should at least just mention it. No pressure, of course. But of course, if you do decide to donate, any donations will always be put towards this channel and these videos. This video is actually brought to you by you. Your guys' various avenues of support allowed me to buy these paints and produce this video, so it really does go a long way. And much appreciation and thanks to anyone who does support this channel, whether that be through donation or purchasing through my shop or just watching, sharing, liking, and commenting on these videos. You guys really do make all of this possible, so thank you so much. And until next time, stay awesome, stay inspired, always. See ya!